The royal decree went out on the winter solstice, and every unmated she-wolf in the Ironbark territory knew exactly what it meant. Alpha Banjo Thorn was finally ready to replace his dead Luna. But there was a condition written into the pack law that made every eligible female's blood run cold. Whoever wanted to wear the crown would first have to prove herself worthy by caring for his disabled son. For one full moon cycle. Alone. With the entire pack watching to see if she'd break. 17 women tried. 17 women failed. And then Maple Cordelia, an Omega who cleaned the pack hospital's blood-stained floors, walked into the Alpha's hall and did something no one had ever dared to do before. She looked at that broken little boy in his wheeled chair, looked at the golden crown sitting on the table between them, and said 2 words that shattered 500 years of tradition. "I refuse." If that moment just sent chills down your spine, subscribe right now because what happens next will destroy you in the best possible way. And tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. You're going to need it for this journey, I promise you that. Let me take you back 3 months before that impossible refusal. Back to when Alpha Banjo Thorn sat in his private chambers and made a decision that would divide his pack down the middle and expose the rot festering beneath Ironbark's perfect surface. Banjo was 38 years old and had been Alpha for 12 years, 6 of them spent as a widower. His mate, Luna Adelaide, had died giving birth to their second child, a daughter who'd lived for exactly 4 hours before following her mother into the darkness. The birth had been complicated, traumatic, and it had left their firstborn son, 5-year-old Jara, forever changed. The boy had been in the room when his mother died, had watched the healers panic, had seen the blood that wouldn't stop flowing, had heard his baby sister's weak cries fade into silence, and something in Jara's mind had fractured. The healers called it trauma-induced paralysis. The boy's legs had simply stopped working. No physical damage. No spinal injury. Just a 5-year-old child whose body had decided that if he couldn't run away from the horror, he simply wouldn't move at all. 6 years later, Jara was 11 years old and still in that wheeled chair. He could walk. The healers had confirmed it repeatedly, but he wouldn't. Some deep, broken part of him refused to try. He'd speak to his father in monosyllables, but barely anyone else. He'd spend hours staring out windows, watching other children run and play. His expression carefully blank. Banjo had tried everything. The finest healers in 5 territories. Therapists who specialized in childhood trauma. Gentle encouragement. Firm discipline. Bribery. Begging. Nothing worked. His son was locked inside himself, and Banjo didn't have the key. And the pack was getting restless. "You need a Luna," his beta, Corbin Fletcher, had said for the 100th time during a council meeting. "The pack needs a mother figure, structure, stability, and Jara needs." "Don't tell me what my son needs," Banjo had cut him off, his voice low and dangerous. "Someone who isn't drowning in grief themselves," Corbin had finished quietly. "Banjo, I say this as your friend, not just your beta. You're a brilliant Alpha. You've kept this pack safe through border disputes, resource shortages, and political nightmares. But you're failing that boy because every time you look at him, you see Adelaide dying. You see your daughter's face. You can't separate the child from the trauma, and it's killing you both." Banjo had wanted to argue, had wanted to rage that Corbin didn't understand, that no one understood what it was like to watch your mate die and your son break in the same night. But the words had stuck in his throat because Corbin was right. He was failing Jara. Had been failing him for 6 years. "So what do you suggest?" Banjo had asked, defeat heavy in his voice. "Find a Luna. But find the right one. Someone who can reach Jara. Someone who sees him as a child, not a tragedy or an obligation." "And how exactly do I find that?" "Interview candidates about their childcare philosophy. Host a pageant." Corbin had hesitated, then spoken carefully. "Use him as the test." The room had gone silent. The other council members, Elders Warwick, Clementine, and Bertie, had exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Explain," Banjo had said, ice in his tone. Any she-wolf can pretend to care about Jara for an hour. They can smile and nod and say the right things. But if you require them to actually care for him, truly care for him alone for an extended period, you'll see their real character. You'll see who has patience, who has genuine compassion, who sees your son as a person instead of an obstacle to overcome on their way to power. You want me to use my disabled son as a test subject for potential Lunas. Banjo's voice had been flat, emotionless, the voice he used right before he ripped someone's throat out. I want you to protect your son from ending up with a Luna who'll resent him, who'll see him as damaged goods, who'll push him aside the moment she has her own pups. Corbin had leaned forward. Make it a public decree. Make it pack law. Any she-wolf who wants to be considered for Luna must spend one full moon cycle caring for Jara, alone, living in the family wing, managing his daily routines, proving she can handle the reality of your life, not just the fantasy of wearing a crown. Elder Birdie, a woman in her 70s with more sense than tact, had spoken up then. It's brutal, but it's also brilliant. It'll separate the social climbers from the genuine hearts immediately. It'll also humiliate my son, Banjo had said quietly. Parade him in front of every ambitious female in the territory as the broken prize they have to tolerate to get what they want. Or, Elder Clementine had countered, her voice gentle, it'll show him that the woman who eventually becomes his stepmother chose him. Deliberately. That she didn't just accept him as part of a package deal, but proved herself worthy of him. And that argument, that small seed of possibility that Jara might actually benefit from this, had been what convinced Banjo. He'd issued the decree 3 days later. The response had been immediate and overwhelming. 23 she-wolves had formally declared their intention to compete for the Luna position. 23 women who thought they could handle 1 month with a traumatized, non-verbal, wheelchair-bound child. Banjo had winnowed it down to 17 based on age, rank, and basic temperament. He'd interviewed each one personally, making it clear that this wasn't a game, that his son was a real child with real trauma, not a prop in their ambitions. They'd all nodded solemnly. They'd all sworn they understood. They'd all promised to treat Jara with respect and genuine care. They'd all been lying. Or at least, they'd been lying to themselves about their capacity for patience and compassion. The first candidate had been Wattle Georgina, a beta's daughter with impeccable bloodlines and a reputation for efficiency. She'd lasted 4 days before she'd been found screaming at Jara for knocking over a glass of water, an accident witnessed by servants that she'd treated like a personal attack. Banjo had revoked her candidacy immediately. The second had been Aster Lillian, an educated wolf who'd studied child development at the capital's finest academy. She'd lasted 9 days before she'd suggested, in front of Jara, that perhaps the boy was malingering for attention and needed tough love to force him to walk. Banjo had barely restrained himself from challenging her right there. She'd been escorted off pack lands within the hour. The third, fourth, and fifth candidates had each found different ways to fail. One had simply ignored Jara most of the time, treating him like furniture. Another had been overly sweet to his face but had been overheard complaining to friends about being stuck babysitting a vegetable. The fifth had actually been kind, but so overwhelmed and anxious that Jara had picked up on her stress and become withdrawn even by his standards. By the time candidate number 12 had failed, the pack had started whispering that maybe the alpha's test was unfair, that no one could meet his impossible standards, that he was deliberately sabotaging potential Lunas because he wasn't ready to move on from Adelaide. But Banjo knew better. The test wasn't unfair. It was simply revealing the truth. Most wolves saw Jara as a problem to be managed, not a child to be loved. Candidate 13 was Tansy Constance, the daughter of a neighboring pack's alpha. She'd arrived with confidence and ambition written all over her beautiful face. She'd been trained in politics and strategy since birth. She'd had answers for everything in her interview. She'd lasted 16 days, longer than anyone else, by being perfectly competent. She'd managed Jara's routines efficiently. She'd spoken to him in appropriate tones. She'd never lost her temper or said anything cruel. But she'd also never connected with him. Never made him smile. Never treated him like anything more than a responsibility to be discharged. On day 16, Banjo had been walking past Jera's room when he'd heard Tansy speaking to someone, presumably on a communication device. 2 more weeks and this charade is over, she'd said, her voice stripped of its usual warmth. I know it's tedious, but it's necessary. Once I'm Luna, I can delegate his care to proper attendants. The Alpha won't expect me to be his nursemaid forever. And honestly, the boy is so far gone I doubt he'd notice if I disappeared entirely. He barely registers my presence as it is. Banjo had felt something cold and furious settle in his chest. He'd dismissed Tansy that evening, his voice formal and emotionless as he'd explained that she wasn't the right fit for his family. She'd been shocked, offended, had demanded to know what she'd done wrong. You treated my son like an endurance test, Banjo had said quietly. Like something to be survived rather than someone to be known. You were never cruel. But you were never kind either. And I won't give him a stepmother who sees him as an obligation. Tansy had left with her pride wounded and her father's political alliance now shaky. The neighboring pack had not appreciated their princess being rejected. But Banjo hadn't cared. He'd made a blood oath the night Adelaide died. He would protect their son, always, even if it meant sacrificing political advantage or personal happiness. Candidates 14 through 17 had each failed in their own ways. One had been caught bribing servants to care for Jera while she attended social functions. Another had suggested sending Jera to a special facility where he could receive proper treatment away from pack lands, essentially proposing they institutionalize him. The last 2 had simply quit, overwhelmed and honest enough to admit they couldn't do it. And then there were no more candidates. The decree had been issued. The test had been administered. And every eligible female in Ironbark territory had either tried and failed, or had been too intimidated to try at all. The Pack Council had convened to discuss what to do next. We could expand the search to other territories, Elder Warwick had suggested. Issue invitations to allied packs. No. Banjo's voice had been firm. I won't parade my son in front of the entire region like he's a circus act. Then what do you propose? Corbin had asked, frustration creeping into his tone. You need a Luna, Banjo. The pack needs leadership structure. And whether you want to admit it or not, Jera needs a mother figure. What Jera needs is for everyone to stop treating him like a puzzle to be solved or a test to be passed. He's a child. He's traumatized. And maybe he doesn't need a new mother. Maybe he just needs his father to stop trying to replace the one he lost. The words had hung in the air, heavy with truth that Banjo hadn't wanted to face. That's grief talking, Elder Birdie had said gently. Not wisdom. You're a good father, Banjo. But you can't be everything to that boy. And you can't let your guilt over Adelaide's death prevent you from building a life for yourself and for him. Before Banjo could respond, there'd been a knock on the council chamber door. A young servant, barely more than a pup, had poked his head in nervously. Alpha. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation with young Master Jera. Banjo had been on his feet immediately. What kind of situation? He's refusing to let anyone help him. The attendant tried to assist with his evening routine and he became very upset. Through things he's asking for. The servant had hesitated. For what? For Maple Alpha. He keeps saying he wants Maple. The council members had exchanged confused glances. Banjo had frowned. Who in the goddess's name is Maple? She's an Omega Alpha. Works in the pack hospital. She cleans the floors and helps with laundry. I don't know why young Master knows her, but he's quite insistent. Something had flickered in Banjo's memory. A few weeks ago, he'd taken Jera to the hospital for a routine checkup with the healers. While they'd been waiting, Jera's will had gotten stuck in a doorway. Before Banjo could fix it, a small figure in a cleaner's uniform had appeared. She'd been young, mid-20s maybe, with honey-colored hair pulled back in a practical braid. She'd crouched down to Jarrah's eye level, hadn't touched his chair without permission, and had spoken to him like he was a person capable of understanding and responding. "Your wheel's caught on the threshold," she'd said matter-of-factly. "I can wiggle it free if you'd like, or you can try backing up a bit first. What would you prefer?" Jarrah had stared at her, really stared with more focus than Banjo had seen from him in months, and had made a small hand gesture. "Back up." "Excellent choice," the Omega had said with a smile. "Always good to try solving problems yourself first. I'll steady the frame so it doesn't tip while you reverse." "Ready." And Jarrah had actually done it. Had maneuvered his chair backwards, repositioning, trying again. The wheel had cleared the threshold on his second attempt. "Brilliant," the Omega had said, standing up. "You're quite good at navigating that chair. Takes a lot of spatial awareness." She'd smiled at him once more, nodded respectfully to Banjo, and had disappeared down the hallway with her cleaning cart before Banjo could even process what had just happened. His son had just problem-solved, had communicated non-verbally, had responded to a stranger's instructions. All things he rarely did anymore. "Who was that?" Banjo had asked the nearest healer. "Oh, that's just Maple. One of the hospital Omegas. She's worked here for about 3 years, I think. Keeps to herself mostly. Does good work." Banjo had filed the information away and then forgotten about it in the chaos of failed Luna candidates and pack politics. But apparently, Jarrah hadn't forgotten. "Tell my son I'll be right there," Banjo had said to the servant. "To the council. We're done here. I'll address the Luna situation when I'm ready, and not before." He'd found Jarrah in his bedroom, sitting in his wheeled chair by the window, his small body rigid with distress. The evening attendant, a kind enough woman named Merle, had been standing helplessly by the door. "Alpha, I'm sorry, I don't know what I did wrong. I've been his attendant for 2 months and we've never had an issue, but tonight he just..." "It's fine, Merle. I'll handle it." Banjo had dismissed her gently, then approached his son. "Jarrah, what's going on, mate?" The boy hadn't looked at him, had just kept staring out the window, his hands clenched on the armrests of his chair. "The servant said you wanted someone named Maple. Can you tell me why?" Jarrah had been silent for a long moment. Then, so quietly Banjo had almost missed it. "She talks to me like I'm real." The words had hit Banjo like a physical blow. "She talks to me like I'm real." As if his son had spent 6 years feeling invisible, dismissed, treated as less than a person. And maybe he had been. Banjo thought about all the attendants who'd spoken to Jarrah in high-pitched, overly simple voices. All the healers who'd discussed his condition over his head as if he couldn't understand. All the pack members who'd looked at him with pity or discomfort and then looked away. Even Banjo himself had been guilty of it. He'd spent so much time trying to fix Jarrah, to heal him, to make him walk again, that he'd forgotten to just see him, talk to him, treat him like the intelligent, observant boy he still was beneath the trauma. "Would you like me to ask Maple if she'd be willing to visit you?" Banjo had asked carefully. Jarrah had finally looked at him then, hope flickering in his dark eyes. He'd nodded. "All right. I'll send for her tomorrow." But Jarrah had shaken his head frantically. He'd pointed at the window, at the moon rising over the pack lands. "It's late, son. She's probably finished her shift. She might be asleep." The look on Jarrah's face had stopped Banjo mid-sentence. It wasn't manipulation. Wasn't a tantrum. It was desperation. Raw, honest desperation to have someone, anyone, see him as real, even for a few minutes. "I'll send for her now," Banjo had promised. Which was how, at nearly 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, Maple Cordelia had found herself summoned to the Alpha's private quarters with no explanation, and a rapidly beating heart that was convinced she'd somehow done something wrong and was about to be expelled from pack lands. Maple was 26 years old and had been an Omega her entire life. The lowest rank in the pack hierarchy, The invisible labor force that kept everything running while receiving almost no recognition or respect. She'd been orphaned at 9 when her parents had died in a rogue attack. She'd been raised in the pack's communal housing, educated just enough to be useful, and then placed in the hospital to work. She'd spent 17 years cleaning blood off floors, scrubbing surgical equipment, washing soiled linens, and being treated like furniture by everyone above her station, which was everyone. But Maple had made peace with her life. She wasn't unhappy. She found satisfaction in doing her work well. She'd made a few friends among the other Omegas. She'd carved out a small existence that was predictable and safe. The one thing she'd never expected was to be summoned to the Alpha's quarters. Ever. When she'd arrived, escorted by a stern-faced guard, she'd been terrified. Had mentally reviewed every interaction she'd had in the past month, trying to figure out what she could have possibly done to warrant the Alpha's personal attention. The guard had led her to a bedroom, the young master's bedroom, she'd realized with shock, and then had left her standing in the doorway while Alpha Banjo had turned to face her. He'd been even more intimidating up close than from a distance. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that had threads of silver at the temples and eyes that looked like they could see straight through to your soul. He'd radiated power and authority and barely contained stress. "You're Maple," he'd said. Not a question. "Yes, Alpha." She'd kept her eyes down, her posture submissive, everything an Omega was supposed to do in the presence of superior ranks. "My son has asked for you specifically. He seems to be having a difficult evening and won't allow his usual attendant to help him. I'm told you encountered him a few weeks ago at the hospital. Do you remember?" Maple had remembered. The little boy in the wheeled chair, with the saddest eyes she'd ever seen and the Alpha hovering anxiously behind him. She'd helped him with his stuck wheel and then disappeared before she could get in trouble for speaking to the air without permission. "I remember, Alpha. He wants to see you. Would you be willing to speak with him? Just for a few minutes. I'll stay in the room, of course." It had been phrased as a request, but Maple had known it was really an order. You didn't say no to the Alpha. Ever. "Of course, Alpha." Banjo had stepped aside, and Maple had seen Jarrah for the first time since their brief encounter. He'd been sitting by the window in his chair, looking small and lost in the large, well-appointed room. Maple had approached slowly, carefully, the way she would approach a frightened animal. She'd stopped a few feet away and had crouched down so they were at eye level. "Hello again," she'd said softly. "I'm Maple. We met at the hospital. You navigated that tricky threshold beautifully, by the way. I was impressed." Jarrah had stared at her, and Maple had seen something shift in his expression. Recognition. Relief. "Your father said you were having a difficult evening. Is there something I can help with?" Jarrah had glanced at Banjo, then back at Maple. Then he'd whispered, so quietly she'd almost missed it. "She wants me to take a bath." Maple had understood immediately. The evening attendant had tried to help with his bathing routine, and Jarrah, who had control over so little in his life, had felt overwhelmed and powerless. "Baths can be exhausting," Maple had said matter-of-factly. "All that water and temperature management and trying to wash hard-to-reach places. Would you prefer to skip it tonight? Sometimes a good face and hand-washing is enough." Jarrah had nodded eagerly. "All right. Would you like me to help with that, or would you prefer to do it yourself?" "Help," Jarrah had whispered. Maple had looked at the Alpha. "With your permission, Alpha, I can assist with a basic washing routine and then let your son rest." Banjo had looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He'd nodded slowly, then stepped back to give them space while remaining in the room. Maple had moved efficiently but gently. She'd fetched a basin of warm water and soft cloths from the attached bathing room. She'd narrated everything she was doing. "I'm going to wet this cloth now, is that okay? Now I'll add a bit of soap. This one smells like pine, which I've always liked," treating Jarrah like a participant in the process rather than a passive recipient of care. She'd washed his face and hands with practiced ease, never rushing, never making him feel helpless or infantilized. When she'd finished, she'd dried him carefully and then had sat back. There. Fresh enough to sleep comfortably. What do you think? Jara had looked at his clean hands, then at her. And he'd smiled. Just a small upturn of his lips, barely noticeable, but real. Thank you, he'd whispered. You're welcome. Sleep well, all right. Maybe I'll see you around the Packlands sometime. She'd stood to leave, assuming her task was complete. But Jara had reached out and grabbed her hand, the first time she'd seen him voluntarily touch anyone. Stay, he'd said. Please. Maple had looked helplessly at the Alpha. Banjo had been staring at his son's hand, gripping this Omega stranger's fingers like a lifeline, and something had been working in his expression that Maple couldn't decipher. Just a few more minutes, Banjo had said quietly. If you're willing. So Maple had stayed. She'd pulled a chair over and had sat beside Jara, letting him hold her hand. She'd talked to him about nothing important. About the plants she'd seen growing in the hospital gardens, about a bird that had built a nest outside one of the windows, about how the autumn leaves were starting to fall. She'd treated him exactly like she'd treat anyone else. No pity. No condescension. Just conversation. After 20 minutes, Jara's grip had loosened. His eyes had started to droop. He'd been ready for sleep. I should go, Maple had said softly. But thank you for letting me visit. You're good company. Will you come back? Jara had asked, his voice slightly stronger now. Maple had glanced at the Alpha, uncertain. This wasn't her decision to make. Would you like her to? Banjo had asked his son. Jara had nodded. Then we'll arrange it. Banjo had walked Maple to the door, had thanked her quietly, and had escorted her personally back through the hallways toward the servants' wing, an honor that had made every wolf they'd passed stare in shock. Before they'd parted ways, Banjo had spoken. You're good with him. Better than anyone has been in 6 years. I just treated him like a person, Alpha. That's all. That's everything, Banjo had corrected. Would you be willing to visit him regularly? Just to talk, to keep him company. I'll pay you for your time, of course, and arrange for your hospital shifts to be adjusted. I don't need payment for talking to a child, Maple had interrupted, then had immediately regretted her boldness. I mean, forgive me, Alpha. I spoke out of turn. But I'd be happy to visit him. He seems lonely. Banjo had studied her for a long moment. You're either very brave or very foolish to refuse compensation from your Alpha. Neither, Alpha. Just honest. I like your son. He's thoughtful and smart, and he deserves to have someone see that instead of just seeing his chair. And there it was again, that look on the Alpha's face like he'd been struck by something he hadn't expected. Tomorrow evening then. Same time. I'll be there, Alpha. That had been 3 months ago. 3 months of Maple visiting Jara every evening after her hospital shift. 3 months of them developing a friendship that seemed to unlock something in the boy that 6 years of professional therapy hadn't touched. 3 months of Jara slowly, so slowly, starting to speak more, engage more, even laugh occasionally. 3 months of Banjo watching this Omega servant accomplish what 17 high-ranking she-wolves couldn't, seeing his son as a person worth knowing. And 3 months of something dangerous starting to grow in Banjo's chest every time he watched Maple crouch down to Jara's eye level, every time he heard her gentle laughter mixing with his son's quiet giggles, every time he saw the way she touched Jara's shoulder in easy affection, something that looked achingly like hope. But Maple was an Omega, the absolute lowest rank. It was pack law, ancient, unchangeable pack law, that alphas mated with betas or other alphas. Never Omegas. The bloodlines had to remain strong. The hierarchy had to be maintained. To even consider an Omega as Luna would be impossible. Forbidden. A violation of 500 years of tradition that would likely result in challenges to his authority and possibly his position. But Banjo couldn't stop thinking about it. The council had noticed his distraction. Corbin had pulled him aside after a particularly unfocused meeting. You're different lately, Corbin had said carefully. More settled. Less desperate. Is it because of how well Jara is doing? Partially. And the other part? Banjo had considered lying. had considered deflecting. But Corbin had been his friend for 20 years. The Omega. Maple. She's remarkable. Corbin's expression had shuttered immediately. No. I haven't. No, Banjo. Whatever you're thinking, the answer is no. You need a Luna. Proper Luna. Not a. Don't. Banjo's voice had been quiet but lethal. Don't you dare finish that sentence. She's an Omega. Pack law is explicit. Alphas don't mate Omegas. It weakens the bloodline, undermines the hierarchy. She's the only person in this entire territory who has managed to reach my son. The only one who treats him like he matters. The only one who makes him laugh. That doesn't make her Luna material. She has no training, no education, no political connections. She'd be eaten alive by rival packs. You'd be challenged constantly. The council would never approve. The crown chose her. A small voice had interrupted. Both men had turned to find Jarrah sitting in the doorway in his chair. His expression more determined than Banjo had ever seen it. Jarrah, you're supposed to be in bed, Banjo had started. The crown chose her, Jarrah had repeated louder this time. I saw it in my dream. The moon goddess showed me. Maple is supposed to be Luna. That's why she makes everything feel right again. Corbin had made an exasperated sound. With all respect, young master, dreams aren't evidence. Then test her, Jarrah had said. His voice ringing with a clarity that had been absent for years. Like you tested all the others. Give her the same test. 1 full moon cycle. If she passes, she's Luna. That's the law you wrote, isn't it? That's the decree Papa issued. Banjo and Corbin had stared at the 11-year-old who suddenly sounded far older than his years. Son, it's more complicated than that. Why? Jarrah had wheeled himself forward. His dark eyes fixed on his father. Because she's Omega. Because she's low rank. Or because everyone is more comfortable with tradition than with truth. Out of the mouths of babes, Banjo had thought, stunned. The test was designed for eligible candidates, Corbin had tried to explain. Omegas aren't eligible. The decree says, any she-wolf who wishes to be considered for Luna, Jarrah had quoted perfectly. Apparently, the boy had been paying far more attention than anyone realized. It doesn't say, any she-wolf of appropriate rank. Says any. Maple is a she-wolf. Therefore, she's eligible if she chooses to compete. Corbin had looked at Banjo helplessly. He's technically correct. The decree's language was deliberately broad to avoid accusations of discrimination. But surely you're not actually considering. I'm considering that my son is right, Banjo had said slowly. The decree stands. If Maple wishes to compete, she has the legal right to do so. She won't, Corbin had said confidently. Omegas know their place. She'd never presume to put herself forward. It would be social suicide. But Banjo hadn't been so sure. There was something in Maple's eyes, something quiet but unbreakable, that made him think she might surprise them all. The next evening, when Maple had arrived for her usual visit with Jarrah, Banjo had asked her to join him in his study first. She'd followed nervously, clearly wondering if she'd overstepped somehow, if the visits were going to end. You've been good for my son, Banjo had said without preamble. Better than good. You've given him something I thought he'd lost forever, hope. Boy. A reason to engage with the world. He's a wonderful boy, Alpha. It's been my privilege to know him. How would you feel about caring for him full-time? Maple had blinked. Alpha. I issued a decree 3 months ago. Any unmated she-wolf in Ironbark territory who wished to be considered for the Luna position would first have to prove herself by caring for Jarrah for 1 full moon cycle. 17 have tried. 17 have failed. The decree remains open. Understanding had slowly dawned on Maple's face, followed immediately by something that looked like panic. Alpha, I'm not. I couldn't possibly. Why not? I'm Omega. It's forbidden. Pack law. Pack law says alphas traditionally mate betas or other alphas. But it doesn't explicitly forbid other pairings. It's tradition, not law. Tradition might as well be law when breaking it means being challenged and potentially killed, Maple had said bluntly. Then, realizing she'd spoken too freely, "Forgive me, Alpha. You're right," Banjo had admitted. "If I chose an Omega as Luna, there would be challenges. Political consequences. Some might even call for my removal as Alpha. Then why are you even discussing this with me?" "Because my son asked me to. Because you're the only person who's been able to reach him. And because—" Banjo had hesitated, then had decided on honesty. "Because when I watch you with him, I see what a Luna is supposed to be. Not a political strategist or a social climber. A Luna is the heart of the pack. The one who sees people, not ranks. Who cares, genuinely cares, about the well-being of every member. You do that naturally. It's who you are." Maple had shaken her head. "I appreciate the faith you have in me, Alpha. Truly. But even if I wanted to compete, which I don't, I'd fail. I have no education in pack politics. No training in leadership. No connections or resources. I'd be humiliated and you'd be weakened by association. I won't do that to Jara or to you. So you refuse even to try. I refuse to embarrass us both, yes." Banjo had studied her, noting the firm set of her jaw, the certainty in her honey-colored eyes. She wasn't being self-deprecating or falsely modest. She genuinely believed attempting to become Luna would be a disaster. "What if I told you that Jara believes you're meant to be Luna? That he claims the moon goddess showed him in a dream?" Something had flickered across Maple's face. "Pain maybe. Or longing. Then I'd say your son has a beautiful, hopeful heart. And I wouldn't want to crush it by proving that sometimes dreams are just dreams, no matter how much we wish they were real." "You're afraid," Banjo had said quietly. "Of course I'm afraid. Accepting that test would put a target on my back from every high-ranking female who's ever aspired to be Luna. It would make Jara's life harder because he'd be associated with my inevitable failure. And it would force you to either defend a choice that weakens your authority or publicly reject me, which would hurt Jara even more. There's no winning scenario here, Alpha. Only varying degrees of loss." She'd been right. Logically, practically, she'd been absolutely right. But Banjo had thought about his son's words. Everyone is more comfortable with tradition than with truth. "What if you didn't fail?" he'd asked. "Alpha, what if you completed the full moon cycle? Proved yourself capable? Showed the pack that an Omega can care for the Alpha's son better than 17 high-ranking wolves could? What then? Then I'd still be Omega. Still be forbidden. Still be impossible. Or," Banjo had said slowly, an idea forming, "you'd have proven that rank is irrelevant when it comes to what truly matters. You'd have legal grounds, established by my own decree, to be considered for Luna. And the pack would have to acknowledge that you succeeded where every appropriate candidate failed." Maple had stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You're serious? You're actually serious about this?" "I'm serious about finding the right Luna for my pack and the right mother for my son. If that happens to be an Omega who cleans hospital floors, then maybe our traditions need examining. They'll challenge you. They'll try to remove you as Alpha. Let them try." Banjo's voice had been steel. "I've held this pack through worse than political disapproval. I can handle a few ambitious wolves who think bloodline matters more than character." Maple had been quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting in her lap. When she'd finally spoken, her voice had been barely above a whisper. "I can't, Alpha. Sorry. I can't put myself forward knowing it will only end in humiliation and pain for everyone involved. I won't do it. Not even for Jara." And that had been that. Banjo had been disappointed but not surprised. Maple was practical, sensible. She'd been surviving as an Omega her entire life by knowing her place and not reaching above it. Asking her to suddenly claim the highest rank in the pack was like asking a bird to become a wolf. Fundamentally impossible, no matter how much you wished otherwise. He'd thanked her for her honesty, had told her she was still welcome to visit Jara, and had resigned himself to remaining without a Luna indefinitely. But he'd underestimated two things: Jara's determination and the pack's cruelty. 2 weeks after that conversation, a new candidate had emerged. Moira Beatrice, the daughter of Elder Warwick, had formally declared her intention to compete for the Luna position. She'd been 29 years old, educated, sophisticated, and had waited until the initial wave of candidates had failed before putting herself forward. Strategic, calculated, smart. She'd lasted 3 weeks, longer than anyone except Tansy, by being perfectly adequate. She'd managed Jara's routines competently. She'd never lost her temper. She'd been patient and professional, but she'd also been cold, distant. She'd treated Jara's care like a job to be performed rather than a relationship to be built. And Jara, who'd experienced what genuine warmth felt like with Maple, had withdrawn completely. He'd stopped speaking even to his father, had stopped engaging with his exercises, had reverted to the shut-down, locked-away version of himself from before Maple's visits had begun. Banjo had watched his son regress and had felt helpless rage building in his chest. This test, this decree he'd issued to protect Jara, was destroying him instead. On day 22 of Moira's trial, Banjo had been working late in his study when he'd heard raised voices from Jara's wing. He'd run, his wolf rising to the surface, every protective instinct screaming. He'd found Moira standing over Jara's chair, her face flushed with anger. Jara had been crying, actually crying, tears streaming down his face, while his dinner sat spilled across the floor. What happened? Banjo's voice had been deadly calm. Moira had turned, composing herself quickly. The boy knocked over his dinner. I was simply explaining that he needs to be more careful. He was trying to feed himself. A quiet voice had interrupted from the doorway. Maple, still in her hospital uniform, had been standing there with fire in her eyes. I was bringing his medicine from the hospital when I heard shouting. I came to check. This doesn't concern you, Omega, Moira had snapped. This is between the candidate and her charge. He's not a charge. He's a child. His name is Jara. Maple had stepped into the room, positioning herself between Moira and the boy. And he was trying to feed himself because that's what we've been working on, building his independence and confidence. Sometimes building skills means making messes. That's how learning works. I don't need an Omega explaining childcare to me, Moira had said coldly. Then maybe you need someone explaining basic human decency, Maple had shot back. Because making an 11-year-old cry over spilled food isn't caregiving. It's cruelty. Moira's face had gone white with fury. How dare you? Enough. Banjo had stepped between them. To Moira, you're dismissed. Effective immediately. Pack your things and leave the family wing within the hour. Alpha, you can't be serious. I've been here 3 weeks. I've done everything required. You made my son cry over an accident. You treated his attempts at independence as inconveniences. And you just called basic human decency into question. Leave. Now. Moira had looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Banjo's expression had warned her against it. She'd left with her dignity in tatters and her father's political disappointment waiting. Banjo had turned to Maple, who was already kneeling beside Jara, wiping his tears with gentle hands and murmuring soft reassurances. You're all right, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Trying new things is brave, and brave people sometimes make messes. That's okay. We'll clean it up together, yeah. Jara had nodded against her shoulder. His thin arms wrapped around her neck like she was the only solid thing in a tilting world. And Banjo had felt something inside him shift permanently. This was what Luna looked like. Not perfect composure or strategic thinking or political connections. Just this, genuine love for a broken child, offered freely without expectation of reward. Maple, he'd said quietly. She'd looked up at him, Jara still clinging to her. I'm withdrawing the decree. No more candidates. No more trials. I won't put my son through this again. Alpha. But I want you to know that if you ever change your mind, if you ever decide you're willing to try, the position is yours. No test needed. No proving yourself. Just yours. Maple had looked shocked. Alpha, I can't. I know. Understand. I'm just saying that the offer stands. Indefinitely. He'd paused. Will you stay tonight? He needs you. Maple had nodded, and she'd stayed. She'd cleaned up the spilled dinner, had helped Jera wash and change, had read to him until he'd fallen asleep with his hand still holding hers. And when she'd finally emerged from Jera's room hours later, she'd found Banjo waiting in the hallway. I can't be Luna, she'd said before he could speak. I'm sorry. I know it's what you want. I know it's what Jera wants. But I can't, Alpha. I physically, mentally, emotionally cannot do it. The pressure would break me. The expectations would crush me. And I'd fail. And Jera would be hurt worse than any spilled dinner could hurt him. So I can't. I'm sorry. Banjo had wanted to argue. Had wanted to tell her she was stronger than she knew. That she was already doing the work of Luna just by loving his son. But he'd seen the exhaustion in her eyes. The weight of her Omega status pressing down on her like physical chains, and he'd understood. Then just be his friend, Banjo had said quietly. That's enough. More than enough. Maple had nodded gratefully and had left. But the pack had other plans. Word had spread quickly that the Alpha had withdrawn his decree. That there would be no Luna. That all candidates had failed, including Elder Warwick's daughter, who'd been publicly dismissed. The high-ranking females who'd tried and failed felt humiliated. Their families felt insulted. And they'd all started asking the same question. If 17 appropriate candidates couldn't pass the Alpha's test, what kind of impossible standard was he holding them to? Someone had provided the answer. The Alpha had developed feelings for an Omega. That's why no one else measured up. He was comparing everyone to a servant girl who had no business even speaking to the air, let alone influencing who became Luna. The rumors had spread like wildfire. Whispers became conversations, became accusations. The Omegas were seducing their way into power. The hierarchy was under attack. The Alpha was being manipulated by a low-rank female with ambitions above her station. And then someone, no one knew who, had started targeting Maple directly. Had begun with small things. Her hospital shifts being suddenly changed without notice. Her belongings going missing from the Omega quarters. Other Omegas receiving warnings that associating with her would result in reduced rations or harder work assignments. Then it had escalated. Someone had scratched the word homewrecker into her locker at the hospital. Another person had spilled cleaning chemicals on her uniform, burning holes in the fabric and nearly burning her skin. A third had locked her in a storage closet for 6 hours until another Omega had found her. Maple had reported none of it. Had simply endured the way Omegas were taught to endure everything. But Jera had noticed. Children always noticed. Maple has bruises, he'd told his father one evening. On her arms. She said she bumped into a shelf, but she's careful. She wouldn't bump into things. Banjo had investigated. Quietly. Carefully. And what he'd found had made his blood boil. A coordinated campaign of harassment and intimidation, orchestrated by at least a dozen high-ranking wolves who wanted to punish Maple for seducing the Alpha and ruining their chances at becoming Luna. He'd brought the perpetrators before the Pack Council, had shown evidence, had demanded justice. Elder Warwick, whose daughter had been one of the failed candidates, had spoken carefully. Alpha, while we don't condone violence or harassment, you must understand the position you've put this Omega in. By showing her favoritism, by allowing her unprecedented access to your son, by withdrawing the Luna decree after her intervention. You've painted a target on her back. Perhaps the solution is to remove the source of temptation. Reassign her to another pack. Let things settle. You want me to exile a pack member because others are harassing her? Banjo's voice had been dangerously quiet. That's your solution. Punish the victim and protect the criminals. I'm suggesting we protect everyone by removing the complication. Maple is not a complication. She's a pack member under my protection. And anyone who harms her harms me. Is that clear? The council had gone silent. I want the perpetrators punished according to pack law. I want public apologies. And I want it made crystal clear that anyone who continues to target Maple will answer to me personally. Any questions? There had been no questions. The perpetrators had been punished. Reduced rations, extra labor, public censure. Apologies had been issued. But the damage had been done. Maple had become a pariah among the Omegas who feared association with her, and a target among the high ranks who resented her. She'd continued visiting Jarrah, but Banjo had seen the toll it was taking. She'd grown thinner, quieter, more withdrawn. The light in her eyes had dimmed. And he'd felt helpless to protect her without making things worse. Then Jarrah had made a decision that changed everything. 1 month after the harassment had been officially resolved, the boy had asked his father to take him to the pack's sacred grounds, the place where the moon goddess's presence was strongest, where wolves went to pray and seek guidance. Banjo had taken him, curious and concerned. Jarrah rarely asked for anything specific. At the sacred grounds, a grove of ancient trees surrounding a clear spring, Jarrah had wheeled himself to the water's edge. He'd stared at his reflection for a long moment. Then he'd spoken. I want to walk. Banjo had felt his heart stutter. Son, I know I can. The healers say there's nothing physically wrong. It's all in my head. All fear. Jarrah had looked up at his father with tears in his eyes. But I'm tired of being scared, Papa. I'm tired of using my chair as a hiding place. I'm tired of letting Mama's death control my life. Jarrah, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because Maple is suffering because of me. Because people think she wants to be Luna, and they're hurting her, and it's my fault for asking you to consider her. So I need to walk. I need to prove I'm not broken. And then maybe everyone will stop obsessing over who takes care of me and leave her alone. The logic was flawed. 11-year-old logic that thought one grand gesture could fix complicated adult problems. But the determination was real. The courage was real. Walking won't solve everything, Banjo had said gently. I know. But it's what I can control. It's what I can do. Jarrah had taken a shaky breath. Will you help me? What father could say no to that? They'd work together over the next 2 weeks. Banjo had supported Jarrah as the boy had forced his legs to remember how to bear weight. They'd practiced in private, away from watching eyes and expectations. Small steps, tiny victories. Jarrah had fallen dozens of times. Had cried in frustration. Had wanted to quit. But he'd kept trying. And then one evening, Jarrah had walked from his bedroom to the common room without his chair. 10 feet. Just 10 feet. But he'd done it. Maple had been there, arriving for her evening visit. She'd watched Jarrah take those shaky, determined steps, and she'd burst into tears. You're walking, she'd whispered, dropping to her knees as Jarrah had reached her. Oh, sweetheart, you're walking. For you, Jarrah had said, wrapping his arms around her neck. So people will stop being mean to you. So you can be Luna if you want. Maple had pulled back, her hands on his shoulders. Jarrah, listen to me. I don't want to be Luna. That was never what I wanted. I just wanted to be your friend. That's all. That's enough. But Papa wants you to be Luna. And I want you to be my mama. And everyone says you can't because you're Omega, but that's stupid. You're the best person I know. You should be Luna. Baby, it's not that simple. Then make it simple. Jarrah had looked at his father. Make her Luna, Papa. Just declare it. You're Alpha. You can do whatever you want. That's not how it works, son. Why not? The moon goddess chose her. I know she did. Feel it. Why doesn't anyone else feel it? And there it was. The child's question that cut through centuries of tradition and political complexity and social structure. Why didn't anyone else feel it? Maybe because they weren't looking with their hearts. Maybe because they were too invested in maintaining power structures that benefited them. Maybe because acknowledging an Omega could be Luna meant acknowledging that everything they believed about rank and worth was fundamentally wrong. Maple had stood, her expression devastated. I need to go. Maple, wait. Banjo had started. No, this has gone too far. Jara is walking, which is wonderful and beautiful, and I'm so proud of him. But he's doing it for the wrong reasons. He thinks he can fix something that can't be fixed. And I can't, let him keep believing that fairy tale. She'd looked at Jara with eyes full of love and pain. You're an amazing boy, and I'm honored to be your friend. But I can't be your mama. I can't be Luna. And you need to accept that, sweetheart. For your own good and mine. She'd left before either of them could respond. Jara had looked up at his father, betrayal written across his face. You were supposed to fight for her. You were supposed to make it work. Son, I can't force someone to accept a role they don't want. She does want it. She's just scared. And you're letting her be scared instead of showing her she doesn't have to be. Jara's voice had been hard with anger, an emotion Banjo hadn't heard from his son in years. Mama wouldn't have given up this easy. Mama would have fought. The comparison to Adelaide had hit Banjo like a physical blow. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. Jara had been crying now, years of grief and frustration finally breaking free. Mama died and I lost my legs and Maple is getting hurt and no one is fixing anything. Everyone just keeps saying it's complicated or it's tradition or it's impossible, but no one is actually doing anything. Banjo had knelt down, had tried to pull his son into a hug, but Jara had pushed him away. I'm tired of people giving up, Papa. I'm tired of everyone accepting that bad things just happen and we have to live with them. What? I made my body work even though my brain didn't want it to. Why can't you make this work? Because some things are bigger than willpower, son. Some things are about laws and traditions and cowardice. Jara had finished. You're scared too. Just like Maple. You're both scared of what people will think, of what might happen. So you're giving up before you even try. Out of the mouths of babes. Banjo had sat there on the floor, staring at his 11-year-old son who just called him a coward, and had realized the boy was right. He'd been so worried about political consequences and pack stability and maintaining his authority that he'd forgotten the most important thing. Leadership wasn't about maintaining comfort. It was about doing what was right even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. He'd made a decision then. One that would either save his pack or destroy it. The next morning, Banjo had issued a new decree. Not a request for candidates. Not a test. Declaration. In 3 days, there would be a gathering at the sacred grounds. Every pack member was required to attend. And at that gathering, the Alpha would officially declare his choice for Luna. The pack had erupted in speculation. Who had he chosen? Had someone passed the test without anyone knowing? Was this about the Omega everyone whispered about? High-ranking families had started positioning themselves, hoping their daughters would be named. Political alliances had been hastily formed and reformed. Everyone had been preparing for the announcement that would shape the pack's future. But Banjo had one more thing to do first. He'd gone to the hospital, had walked past staring staff members, had found Maple in a storage room organizing medical supplies. We need to talk, he'd said. Maple had looked at him with resignation. If this is about your declaration, Alpha, I can't. I'm not asking you to be Luna. She'd blinked. You're not. I'm asking you to come to the sacred grounds in 3 days. To stand before the pack. And to make a choice. What choice? Whether to accept or refuse the Luna crown in front of everyone. Publicly. Officially. No pressure from me, no expectations, no obligations. Just you deciding what you want in your own voice where everyone can hear. Maple had stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Why would you do that? Because my son is right. I've been a coward. I've been so worried about political fallout that I haven't actually asked you what you want. I've assumed. I've projected. I've made decisions for you instead of with you. And that's not how a true Alpha leads. Alpha, if I publicly refuse the crown, it'll humiliate you. Then I'll be humiliated. But you'll have your autonomy. You'll have your voice. And maybe that's more important than my ego. Banjo had stepped closer. Maple, I'm not asking you to say yes. I'm asking you to have the choice. Real choice, not just the illusion of it. You can refuse in front of the entire pack, and I'll accept it with grace. Or you can accept, and I'll fight every challenge that comes our way. But it'll be your decision, not mine. Not traditions. Not the pack's expectations. Yours. Maple had been silent for a long time, her honey-colored eyes searching his face for something. Truth, maybe. Sincerity. Proof that this wasn't manipulation dressed up as respect. Finally she'd spoken. 3 days. 3 days. And you'll truly accept if I refuse. I'll truly accept whatever you choose. Maple had nodded slowly. Then I'll be there. Which brought them to now. To this moment. To the sacred grounds filled with hundreds of pack members, all watching as Alpha Banjo Thorn stood beside his walking son and waited for an Omega to decide the future of their pack. Maple had arrived exactly on time, dressed in simple gray Omega colors. Her hair in its usual practical braid. She'd walked through the crowd with her head high but her hands trembling. Banjo had watched her approach, and he'd felt something fierce and proud swell in his chest. Regardless of what she chose, she was brave. So incredibly brave just to show up. The High Priestess, an ancient wolf who served the moon goddess, had stepped forward, carrying the Luna crown on a velvet cushion. The same crown that had adorned Ironbark's Lunas for 500 years. Gold and silver intertwined, embedded with moonstones, blessed by the goddess herself. Maple Cordelia, the priestess had intoned, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent grounds. Alpha Banjo Thorn has declared his intention to name you Luna of Ironbark. Should you accept? This is unprecedented. This challenges tradition. This requires the goddess's approval, not just the Alpha's desire. Maple had stood very still, staring at the crown like it might bite her. Do you accept this nomination? The priestess had asked. And Maple had done what no one expected. She'd looked at the crown. She'd looked at Banjo, standing tall and nervous beside his son. She'd looked at Jara, who was watching her with desperate hope in his young face. Then she'd spoken, her voice clear and steady. I refuse. The crowd had gasped. Banjo had felt his heart drop into his stomach. Jara had made a small, wounded sound. But Maple hadn't finished. I refuse, she'd repeated, to accept this crown under false pretenses. I refuse to take it just because a child wishes it or an alpha offers it or tradition is ready to be challenged. I refuse to accept it as charity or pity or some grand gesture of progressive thinking. She'd stepped closer to the crown, and for the first time, Banjo had seen something burning in her eyes that he'd never seen before. Not fear. Not resignation. Fire. If I'm going to be Luna, Maple had said, her voice growing stronger, then I'm going to be Luna because I choose it. Because I believe I can do this job better than anyone else available. Because I see what this pack needs, not what it thinks it needs but what it actually needs, and I'm the one who can provide it. Not because I'm Omega. Not in spite of being Omega. But because of who I am underneath the rank that was assigned to me at birth. The High Priestess had studied her with ancient, knowing eyes. And who are you, Maple Cordelia? I'm someone who sees people when everyone else sees ranks. I'm someone who knows what it's like to be invisible and powerless and dismissed, which means I'll never forget the wolves at the bottom of the hierarchy. I'm someone who learned to survive with nothing, which means I understand resourcefulness and resilience. I'm someone who loves a broken child not because it'll earn me status, but because he deserves to be loved. She'd looked directly at Jara. I'm someone who knows that walking 10 feet is a bigger victory than winning a dozen battles, because healing is harder than fighting. She'd turned back to the crown. So no. I refuse to accept this crown as a gift or a favor or a political experiment. But if you're offering it as a responsibility, if you're telling me that this pack needs someone who'll fight for the forgotten and challenge the comfortable and refuse to accept that tradition is more important than justice, then yes. Accept. Choose this. I choose to be Luna. knowing full well it'll be the hardest thing I've ever done and that half the pack will hate me for it and that I'll make mistakes and face challenges I can't even imagine yet. I choose it anyway. The sacred grounds had been absolutely silent. Then Jara had started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. His young face split in a grin so wide it looked painful. Banjo had been frozen, staring at this Omega who'd just delivered the most magnificent acceptance speech he'd ever heard. Who'd taken what should have been a moment of gracious gratitude and had turned it into a declaration of war against complacency. The High Priestess had smiled, actually smiled, which she rarely did. The goddess is pleased. She's been waiting for someone brave enough to refuse the easy path and choose the hard right one. She'd lifted the crown from its cushion. Maple Cordelia, Omega of Ironbark, I name you Luna. May you lead with wisdom, love with your whole heart, and never forget what it means to be unseen. She'd placed the crown on Maple's head. And the crown had burst into light. Not the soft glow from legends. This was brilliant, blazing, unmistakable divine approval. The moonstones had shone like captured stars, and every wolf present had felt it, the presence of the moon goddess herself, confirming this choice. The pack had fallen to their knees, some in reverence, some in shock, some in reluctant acceptance that maybe, just maybe, the goddess knew better than tradition. Banjo had approached Maple slowly, this woman who just appended 500 years of hierarchy with a refusal that became an acceptance that became a revolution. You chose, he'd said quietly, so only she could hear. I chose, she'd confirmed. You know this won't be easy. I know. You know you'll face challenges. I'll face them. She'd met his eyes, and Banjo had seen steel beneath the gentleness. But I won't face them alone. I'll have you. I'll have Jara. I'll have every Omega and forgotten wolf in this pack who finally has someone who understands their struggle. And I'll have the goddess, who apparently has a sense of humor about hierarchy. Banjo had laughed. Actually laughed for the first time in years. Then I suppose we'd better prepare for war. Not war, Maple had corrected, smiling. Revolution. There's a difference. She'd turned to face the pack, the crown blazing on her head, and had spoken with the voice of someone who'd found her power not despite being Omega, but because of everything being Omega had taught her. I am your Luna, not your servant, not your experiment, not your token progressive choice. You're Luna, and I'm going to change things. Slowly, carefully, with respect for tradition where tradition deserves respect and absolute disregard for it when it doesn't. If you can't accept that, challenge me now. Otherwise, kneel and swear your loyalty, because we've got work to do. Half the pack had looked scandalized. Quarter had looked intrigued. And the final quarter, mostly Omegas and low ranks, had looked at her like she was the moon goddess incarnate. One by one they'd knelt. Some eagerly, some reluctantly, but they'd knelt. And Maple Cordelia, Omega, hospital cleaner, invisible wolf, had become Luna. The celebrations had been subdued. Too many high-ranking wolves were still processing the impossible thing they'd just witnessed. But in the Omega quarters, there'd been singing and crying and prayers of gratitude that someone, finally someone, had climbed from the bottom to the top and had lived to tell about it. That night, after the ceremonies and formalities and endless introductions, Maple had found Jara in his room. He'd been sitting by the window, standing by the window actually, his legs growing stronger every day, watching the moon. You chose, he'd said when she'd entered. I chose, she'd confirmed, sitting beside him. Why? You were so scared. What changed? Maple had been quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain adult realizations to a child's heart. I realized that refusing because I was scared was just another form of letting fear control me. Like you in your chair. The chair wasn't the problem. The fear was. And I was using Omega status like a chair, something to hide behind to justify why I couldn't try. But you're not hiding anymore. No, I'm not. She'd looked at the crown sitting on the dresser, still glowing faintly in the darkness. I'm going to fail sometimes, you know. I'm going to make mistakes, get things wrong. Probably embarrass your father and make powerful enemies. That's okay, Jara had said with absolute certainty. Mama said the best leaders aren't the ones who never fail. They're the ones who get back up and try again. Your mother sounds like she was very wise. She was. And she would have liked you. I think she'd be happy you're going to be my new mama. He'd hesitated. If that's okay. If I call you mama. Maple had felt tears prick her eyes. More than okay. It would be an honor. Jara had hugged her then, and something had settled in Maple's chest. Not love, not the instant, overwhelming kind from fairy tales, but commitment, determination, a bone-deep sense that this was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The following months had been exactly as difficult as Maple had predicted. She'd faced 3 formal challenges to her position, all from high-ranking wolves who'd believed they could intimidate her into stepping down. She'd met each challenge not with violence but with words, using pack law and the goddess's obvious approval to defend her place. She'd reformed Omega treatment systematically, establishing minimum standards for housing, working conditions, and respect. She'd created avenues for low ranks to voice grievances without fear of retaliation. She'd forced the pack to examine their traditions and decide which ones served the greater good and which ones just served the comfort of those in power. She'd made enemies, powerful ones. But she'd also made allies, wolves who'd been waiting for someone brave enough to say that the system was broken and needed fixing. And Banjo had stood beside her through all of it. Not in front of her leading. Not behind her following. Beside her as partners should be. They'd grown into love slowly, building it brick by brick through shared challenges and late-night strategy sessions and the 1,000 small intimacies of running a pack together. It wasn't the instant, fated mate bond of legends. It was better. It was chosen every single day, with full knowledge of each other's flaws and strengths. 6 months after Maple had accepted the Luna crown, Banjo had asked her something he'd been wondering since that day at the sacred grounds. Why did you really refuse at first? And don't say fear. There was something else. Maple had been quiet, choosing her words carefully. Because I needed to know if I was choosing this or if it was choosing me. Does that make sense? Not really. She'd smiled. If I'd accepted immediately, I would have always wondered if I did it for Jara. Or for you. Or because the goddess wanted it. Or because it was some grand romantic gesture. But by refusing first, by walking away from it, I proved to myself that when I came back, when I accepted, it was my choice. Not destiny's. Not expectations. Mine. Banjo had pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. You're extraordinary. You know that. I'm Omega who refused a crown and then took it anyway. I'm either extraordinary or insane. Possibly both. Both. Banjo had agreed, laughing. Definitely both. And they'd been right. Both of them. Because sometimes the most extraordinary thing you can do is refuse what everyone expects you to want, and then choose it anyway on your own terms. Sometimes the crown doesn't choose you. You choose the crown. And that makes all the difference. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt invisible or powerless or like your rank defined your worth, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this is just the beginning of Maple's revolution. And you don't want to miss what happens when an Omega Luna decides that tradition is just another word for things we haven't had the courage to change yet. Drop a comment telling me your city so I can send you that hug I promised. And if you believe that sometimes the greatest power move is refusal followed by deliberate choice, if you believe that being seen is just the first step toward demanding to be heard, then share this story with someone who needs to know that crowns aren't given. They're claimed. By those brave enough to refuse them first. Until next time, remember, you're not defined by the rank you were born with. You're defined by the courage you choose to live with. And somewhere out there your crown is waiting, not for you to accept it gratefully, but for you to refuse it boldly and then take it on your own terms. From my heart to yours, may you all have the courage to refuse what's offered and the strength to choose what's right. May you all find your voice, your power, and your place, not where others put you but where you decide you belong. This is your reminder. The most powerful word in your vocabulary isn't yes. It's no, not like this. Say it, mean it, and then build something better.